morning, FCCT. How's it going today? Good. All right. I hope we have lots of energy today. I got a little less sleep than I would prefer last night, so I'm a little low, and so I'm going to need feedback. I'm going to need encouragement, prayers, all that kind of stuff. And I know that you guys are going to be there for me, right? Yeah. All right. Good. Because what I want to start off with today is a story where let's say teammates weren't exactly there for each other. In 1994, there was Winter Olympics in Lillehammer, and I don't know why both of my sermons last week and this week have started off with tales of Winter Olympics, probably because it's so hot out, and it does me good to think about the snow and the ice. Those kinds of things. But do you guys remember the 1994 Olympics in Lillehammer? Lillehammer was full of drama, unusual drama. And if you remember that at all, the drama seemed to center around the ice skating rink. And there was a moment that the press was gathered around because two skaters were going to take the ice together, and they were teammates on the U.S. Olympic figure skating team. And one of them especially had something significant about her clothing. She was wearing a specific skating outfit, and that outfit was one that she wore when she was attacked a few months earlier before the national championships or the world championships. And she was attacked by somebody sent by her teammate. You might remember this. It was Nancy Kerrigan. And she was wearing the outfit that she had on when she was attacked by people sent by Tonya Harding. You guys remember that? Big drama. And one of the things that was so awkward about the whole thing is that these two were sharing the ice doing warm-ups. And you could tell that there was just so much tension there that it was palpable. Because here we had two people that were supposed to be teammates, and yet one had... according to everything that we knew at the time, we didn't know for sure, right? But the speculation was at the time that this had taken place, that Tonya Harding had sent her ex-husband and another guy to break the knee of Nancy Kerrigan so that she couldn't win the gold medal. Now, she did have to withdraw from the championships, but when it came to this time at Lillehammer, Nancy Kerrigan would win a silver medal, and Tonya Harding would come in 8th place. It seemed like the tension and everything else going on affected Tonya Harding way more than it did Nancy Kerrigan. Today we're going to be talking about how people are connected. And in order to talk about how people are connected, we need to talk about how all things are connected. So we're going to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. If you want to turn there, we'll be looking at verse 25 through 28. Now, one of the things that's really fascinating about the Bible is that the Bible uses language that's kind of unfamiliar to us in a lot of ways. It might be theological, in which case it's kind of a specific type of jargon or terminology that we're not familiar with. And it also can be archaic, something that maybe was at one time widely known, but now is a lot less understood. And in this situation, we have a little bit of both of those things going on, because it's talking about reigning, ruling, subjection, those kinds of things. And those are things that we don't have a tendency to really understand or deal with very much today. And so let's start in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 25, and it says, "For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. For God has put all things in subjection under his feet." But when it says all things are put in subjection, it is plain that he is accepted who put all things in subjection under him. When all things are subjected to him, then the Son himself will also be subjected to him, who put all things in subjection under him, that God may be all in all. Now, that's what I'm talking about, right? This is the kind of passage that you read in the Bible and you go, okay, let's skip to some parts that make sense, right? So what is this saying? It's saying that he's going to reign until he's put all enemies under his feet. Now, again, we have a tendency to shy away from language like that. But understand that the Bible speaks not of flesh and blood, but against powers and principles. That there are powers and principles that need to be put in subjection. Now, when we talk about subjection, we have a tendency to see that as a very negative thing. But the problem is that from the ancient mindset, that was not necessarily a negative thing. In fact, it was largely a positive thing. It really meant to put things in order, to put things in their proper place, to contain things to the areas that they should be, and not let them go further than that. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. Death has its purpose, but it must be held to its purpose. And there's a point at which death is no longer needed for its purpose, and it must be done away with. For God has put, in verse 27, all things in subjection under his feet. Now, what it's going to say, the rest of this is going to say, it's accepting the Father. The Father is not one of these all things. But outside of the Father, everything needs to be put under the feet of Jesus Christ. When all things, verse 28, are subjected to him, then the Son himself will also be subjected to him who put all things in subjection unto him. So the Father is going to be the thing that's at the top. And Jesus, when everything is under Jesus' feet, then Jesus will be under the Father. And all of these things will commence. They will flow. They will be ordered in the proper way. What this is saying is that everything that exists has a relationship to each other. Everything that exists has a purpose. Everything that exists has a place. And in order for us to understand how we relate to each other, we have to understand what the point of all creation is. I'm calling the sermon today The Silent Planet. C.S. Lewis had a space trilogy, and I don't know if any of you guys read that space trilogy. It's not one of his better-known works. There were 3 books, of course, in the space trilogy, and the first one was Out of the Silent Planet, the second was Paralandra, and the third was That Hideous Strength. And really, it's interesting, C.S. Lewis had his view of the world formed by his studies. He studied ancient medieval literature. And he used, for the basis of this space trilogy, he used the understanding of the cosmos that was in existence in the Middle Ages. And in the Middle Ages, what they believed is that all the heavenly bodies had what they called a kindly encycling. They responded joyfully to the Word of God. But in the center was a planet that did not move. It did not respond to the Word of God, and that planet was Earth. Because human beings did not respond to the Word of God. And to understand where they got this view of the world, we have to go back even further than the medieval times into the ancient world. And today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about how this view that started in the ancient world helps us to understand or is an attempt to reach what our Bible is saying right here in 1 Corinthians. These people did not have the Bible, but they had their consciences. And they had the world around them that reveals something of the nature of God. And so they were trying to reach out for something that the Bible tells us explicitly here. And it formed the foundation of this medieval worldview, and it helps us to understand how we fit in with one another. And to do that, we're going to look at 3 things today. We're going to look at the music of the spheres, we're going to look at from many into one, and then we're going to finally look at brothers and sisters. How do we relate to each other? So let's first talk about the music of the spheres. There was a guy in the ancient world named Pythagoras. You might have heard of him. Anyone? Okay. A few. He was kind of a strange fella. At least that's what we can ascertain from the things that were written about him. And we don't know exactly what he believed, but we know what people said he believed. And Pythagoras apparently at one point was walking through the marketplace when he heard the hammers on the anvils of the blacksmiths. And as he was listening to the hammers of the blacksmiths, he realized that if you had a hammer that was twice as big as another hammer, that it would make a sound that, while not the same as the other hammer, would sound really good with that other hammer. And basically what he was figuring out was that there was a mathematical relationships that could be understood to form the foundation of music and what sounded good together musically. Now, this was an amazing epiphany. Now, Pythagoras then came up with a whole theory of how this worked. And what's interesting is that his theory is largely wrong. But it's also largely right. And what's interesting is that the reason that Pythagoras was largely wrong was because this didn't work out as neatly as he would have liked it to, because the world is actually more complicated than he understood. But he was largely right in the general ideas of what he had. And those ideas actually find their home in music theory. He realized that there were mathematical relationships between notes and between understanding how notes work together and what made them sound good together. This was carried forward by a Christian named Boethius, who died in 524, and he wrote on the fundamentals of music. And what he did and what Pythagoras did, both of them, was that they took this understanding of music and realized that you could extrapolate this to kind of the nature of everything that was created. That because music had this mathematical formula and foundation for what sounded harmonious, what they intuited from this was that you could take that to celestial bodies. You could take that to the movement of planets. You could take that to everything in the universe. And if that was the case, then there was a way of living that could be said to be harmonious with everything that was created. Now, with Pythagoras, he didn't really understand exactly what that was or what the end point was, but what Boethius brought to the table, because he was a Christian, is he understood that this is the way that God created everything, and that everything points to the glory of the Creator. That the thing at the end of this, that harmonizes everything in existence, that everything is pointed at, that this thing is the glory of God. And so he had this idea on the cosmic level, on the human level, where our soul and our spirit are harmoniously joined together under certain behaviors, certain circumstances, certain attitudes. And also in the real world, as we call it, the real world, with musical instruments and those kinds of things. This was then carried forward by a guy named Johannes Kepler, who died in 1630 and wrote Harmonics Mundi. And he said this: the heavenly motions, meaning the planets, are nothing but a continuous song for several voices, perceived by the intellect, not the ear. You see, what these guys were starting to understand was that this harmoniousness of all things in creation was music, but it wasn't a kind of music that you could hear. It was a music that you could understand. It was more music for the mind than for the ears. What's interesting is all these people were onto something, even though a lot of their details of their theories were wrong, because they just didn't have a deep enough understanding. But what's interesting is that some people point to modern string theory as carrying this forward largely. The idea of the mathematical nature and foundation for all reality. All of them together bring about this idea that everything exists for a purpose, and that everything finds its place by finding what it fits into this purpose, how it fits into this purpose. So imagine, if you will, an orchestra tuning up. Have you guys heard that before? I mean, you've gone to performances? Imagine, just close your eyes for a second and imagine in your mind the sound of an orchestra tuning up. And each person is trying to tune their own instrument, right? They're trying to make sure that their instrument is in tune. And so when you listen to it, it sounds very chaotic. It's a cacophony. But then imagine that the conductor steps up to the podium and he taps his baton on the lectern. And that at that moment, silence falls over the group of musicians. And then as the conductor raises his baton, all of a sudden the music starts and it's all together and it's all harmonious. What's happened is that you have a multiplicity of things where everybody's about their own business. Everybody's concerned with themselves. But then when the conductor raises his baton and the music begins, now everybody is not about themselves and their own things, but they're about following the conductor. And because they've laid down their own purposes now to take up this joint purpose, all of the instruments find their true voices and they find their true meaning. You see, while everybody was about themselves, their true voices were not even heard. But then, as they take their parts in the symphony, the best qualities of each instrument are brought out at the proper times. They're used at the proper place for the proper purpose. They evoke the right emotions. Do you understand what I'm saying? That only in laying down their individualness do they find their true purpose and their true meaning, and do they find really themselves. It's interesting that with the birth of Jesus in Luke chapter 2, verse 13 and 14, it says, "And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host praising God and saying, 'Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among those with whom He is pleased.'" Now what's fascinating about this is you had shepherds who were going about their business, doing shepherd things, right? Which probably have something to do with sheep and probably are largely unpleasant. They're doing shepherd things, right? They're corralling the sheep. They're keeping the sheep from killing themselves in the river. They're keeping the sheep from killing themselves with the wolves. They're keeping the sheep from doing just dumb things. They're shearing the sheep, which is unpleasant. They're doing all kinds of things. They're about their business. When all of a sudden, that gets interrupted because there's a heavenly choir. And this heavenly choir is redirecting them, focusing them on the glory of God in the highest, and letting them understand that something is happening on earth that goes along with that glory of God, that somehow is in line with that glory of God, that somehow is being brought to order, that something on earth is changing, that there is now a conductor that brings all of our efforts into their own. The Bible speaks of a great mystery. In 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16, it says, "Great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of godliness." Great indeed is the mystery of godliness. Well, why is this a mystery? You see, if you think about the ancient world, Pythagoras kind of understood that everything needs to be harmonious, everything needs to come together, everything needs to point at something. But what? What is it that everything is pointing to? What is it that this could all be about? What's the answer that could justify this? I remember watching a show called Lost. Anybody watch that show? Man, they had me hooked. They had me hooked. So I started watching the show Lost. And if you don't know, what's happening is in the show Lost, there's a group of people that are on this island and they're part of a plane crash. And at first it just seems like a survival plane crash situation. But then all these very strange things start happening. And as time goes on, they just get stranger and stranger. And you start to think to yourself, what could bring all this together? What's the mystery of this island? And what I understood at the time, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but but the show wasn't supposed to go on for as long as it did. But it was so popular that they added seasons. And I remember there was a season, it seemed like from the beginning of the season to the end of the season, nothing really happened. Except they ran around all over the island but nothing at the end. And I stuck with it, because I thought, I am so invested. I need to know what the mystery is. And I won't tell you what the mystery is. If you start to watch the show, you can go through what I went through. But I can tell you, the answer was underwhelming. In fact, I don't think I've ever been more disappointed in the end of a show than I was with that show. Because when it came down to it, they couldn't come up with anything that would justify my interest in this. What the Bible here is saying is something very profound. It's saying that there is a great mystery at the heart of all of human history. And it's a great mystery that does the opposite of lost. When you find the answer, it doesn't disappoint you. It leaves you breathless. It's so huge. It's so grand. It's so encompassing. It's so much greater than you could possibly have understood. And it ties every bit together. There's nothing loose hanging on. Everything is connected. Everything is brought together. Everything gets answered. And even those things that you don't know the answer to right now, you know that there is an answer, and at some point it will be revealed to you. You have confidence because of all the things that you've seen brought together. You have confidence that there will be an answer that's so far beyond what you can understand. Everything that has been answered so far has been so much bigger than you thought. That you know that those small things that you haven't put together yet, it's not a lack of there being an answer, it's a lack of your ability at this point to understand the answer. Think about how great this mystery is. The calling of Abraham. Go to a land I will show you. Leave your homeland. Leave your father and mother. Leave this land that you're in. Go to a land I will show you. Why? We're not told. I'll make you a great nation. Everybody will be blessed. Well, what does that mean, everybody's going to be blessed? I'm not going to tell you. The rise and the fall of nations. A baby saved from the Nile in a basket. The selection of David as an unlikely king. And his road to kingship, which is as unlikely as it could possibly be. The prophecy of many strange individuals in the Old Testament. And some of those prophets were strange. The birth in a manger. The ministry that seemed too great to possibly be true. The disappointment of an arrest, the anguish of a crucifixion, and the glory of a resurrection. Is there a point to all of history? I hear people say today, we are on the right side of history. Have you guys ever heard that? We're on the right side of history. And it's funny to me because a lot of those people, if I said, well, is history going someplace? I think it would be a lot like Lost. The answer would be disappointing. If they only knew that there is a place for history to end, and that place is so much bigger than they could possibly understand. Is there meaning and purpose to our lives within that history? People throughout history have said that we make our own purpose and we make our own meaning in life. But the meaning of a sentence only makes sense if it has something to do with the book. A book full of billions of sentences that people had made up but had nothing to do with each other would be a waste of time. And so therefore, for our lives to have meaning, we can't just make it up. It has to fit into the story that's going on. The problem of ultimate freedom for your life is the problem of complete meaninglessness. And so to be a part of the story, we must lay down that ultimate freedom. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 24, it says, "Then Jesus told his disciples, 'If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me.'" We all sitting here today have the ability to take ultimate freedom for our lives and say, "I will decide what my life is about. I will decide what its purpose is. I will decide what its meaning is. I will decide if my life is going to be about hedonism. I will decide if my life is going to be about asceticism. I will decide if my life is going to be about nothing at all. I will take that ultimate freedom and I will enjoy that ultimate freedom." But I tell you that that ultimate freedom comes with the ultimate price tag, the price tag of meaninglessness. Because in the end, all of those words that you label your life with and all the realities of the choices you make, for them to have any meaning at all, for your choice to have any point to it at all, it must be nested within a larger story. And that is what you've given up when you've embraced ultimate freedom. To find your life, you must lose it. And to everyone here today, I say that if you want to find your life, if you want your life to have some kind of purpose, if at the end of your life, on your deathbed, you want to say to yourself, "My life meant something. It means something that I was here. It wasn't just a waste. I didn't take this one thing, this one chance that I've got and throw it away, but it has meaning." The only way to do that is to lay it down. Without this laying down of your ultimate freedom, all choices that you make are completely irrelevant. Let's talk about being or going from many into one. If we don't lay down that ultimate freedom for our lives, we are like the instrument that refuses to stop tuning. You understand that when an instrument is tuning, it's not trying to play something. It's not doing a piece of music. It's self-referential. It's trying to do whatever it needs to do to be what it is. It's trying to do whatever it needs to do in order to be a part of something. But at that moment that it's doing that, it's not a part of something. In order for it to be a part of something, it needs to lay down itself and move toward a unity. If you think about a football team as an example, there was a movie that came out with Marky Mark, right? How great is that? Marky Mark. Man, I never would have guessed. When I saw him who would have thought this guy's going to be an actor and stuff? You remember the movie Invincible? So it's about a guy. It's based on a true story. It's about a guy who's living in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia's doing poorly. They get a new head coach, and the new coach trying to spark some enthusiasm, and so he holds open tryouts. Open tryout. Anybody who wants to can come try out to be on the Philadelphia Eagles. You can just show up. And so thousands of guys do. And if you remember, if you've seen the movie, a lot of guys show up, and let's just say they're not in the best shape. And some of them clearly have a lot of things that aren't football related going on in their life. In fact, one guy has, he's fairly large. Let's say he's put on probably a few pounds since his prime. And he's wearing like a cape and kind of almost looks like a superhero. Not exactly football related. What's the purpose of this tryout? The main character, I think his name, was his name Vince? What was his name? Somebody help me. What was that? football guy. His name was something. His name was Marky Mark, of course. So Marky Mark, he's there and he's trying out. And he makes the team. Well, why does he make the team? What are they trying to do in the team? What are they trying to do in the tryout? What's the purpose of a tryout? The test, right? It's a test. And what are you doing? You're filtering out. You're filtering out the people who have enough football in their life. Right? Some people's lives don't contain enough football. And you're filtering those people out, and you're trying to find the people who have enough football in their life. And who on a team, who is the most football on a team? Who is the most football? This is the best question I've ever asked. The coach, right? The coach is the most football on the team, because if he's a good coach, he's been football for his life. Right? He eats football, he sleeps football, he does nothing but football, and he's been doing that for years and years, and so he is the most football. And what is his job as coach? His coach is to take out of his players all the things that aren't football. I remember watching an ESPN documentary. It was talking about the USC Trojans of, it might have been the 80s, 90s, I don't know. But they got to the point of it was because maybe it was Hollywood, because, California, Los Angeles, all that stuff. It became like these college players were like celebrities. And how all the distractions, all these guys were like, they were all taking press tours, and everybody was talking to them, and they were trying to work, future deals and all of them, and all these egos and all of this stuff became such a distraction for the team that the team became completely ineffective. The coach had let too much stuff into football that wasn't football. And the coach's job is to say, this is football. And anything that's not football is not here. That's his job. You see, the point here is this, and this is an important point. Hierarchy is the expression of meaning. That's what it is. Hierarchy is the expression of meaning. It's the practical manifestation of the music of the spheres. Without hierarchy, everything cannot be brought together. Without there being one thing, something that we're aiming towards, something that brings it all together, without there being some who have more of that than others, and their job is to help the others to get more of that in their lives, and as they get more of that in their lives, they move up the hierarchy. Without that, it can't work and it can't exist. In a football team, everybody submits to the coach. And the coach sacrifices himself to take not football out of the players by putting them through drills and putting them through practice and putting them through conditioning. And this is called discipleship. This is called discipleship. I mean, it's not in football, but you understand. It's called discipleship. Matthew chapter 8, verse 23 says, "And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him." Well, that doesn't say much. Well, it says everything, doesn't it? When he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. That's what it means to be a disciple, is you follow him because he's the most, and you want to be more. And so you follow him because you know if you follow him, by the act of following him, the things that aren't will be taken away so that you can be more. You see, what happens here is you have to lay down your life. And what does it mean to lay down your life? It means to follow him. To allow him to order your life so that you can be a part of the story that's going on. That's what it means to be a disciple. And all of us have to make the decision that we care enough, we want enough to be a part of what's going on in the universe, to be a part of the music of the spheres, that we will get rid of everything in our lives that doesn't fit in. We will be his disciple. We will follow him because he is the most. He is the most glorious. He is the exact representation of the Father. And so if I follow him, the things that aren't of God will be peeled away from me in the act of following him. This is called discipleship. And so my question is very simple. Are you following? I'm not talking about, it's funny because I know that when I preach things, you're like me. You think, I wish so-and-so would have heard that sermon. Right? I know how it is. I listen to more sermons than possibly anybody here. Maybe some of you listen to more sermons than I don't know, but I listen to a lot of sermons, and there are times when it comes into my mind, oh, I wish so-and-so could hear this. And it's never about you guys. You guys are just great. It's about other people. Other people. But that's always the wrong answer. The question isn't so-and-so following, or I wish so-and-so could do this. Are you following? Are you committed? Are you making a commitment of your time, your effort, your energy to follow him? Are you saying every day in your life, I need to get rid of the things that don't fit in. I need to get rid of the things that don't belong. I've got to become more like Christ. When a symphony starts to play, the notes are related to the composition, but they're also related to one another. When we become Jesus' disciples, we become oriented to Christ, but in that, we also become oriented to one another. In 2 Corinthians 8, verse 3 through 5, it says, "For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means, of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. And this not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us." This is the way that it works. If you start trying to give yourself to others, you will be part of their symphonies. You will be part of that piece of music, their piece of music. If you give yourself first to Christ, you will be part of the Father's piece of music. And in doing so, you will be better related to others than if you gave yourself to them. You see, the important thing here is that this passage is talking about, these saints, they're giving sacrificially. They're in a great amount of suffering themselves because of their poverty. But they beg for the opportunity to help out other saints. And it's not because they've become some kind of disciples of those other saints. They haven't had their futures taken over by the desires of those other saints, by the whims of those other saints, by the goals of those other saints. They haven't been co-opted into somebody else's plan. They haven't had their futures oriented toward another's glory. But they've given themselves to Jesus. And because of that, they have a better relationship with those saints, and they desire to give. The way that we work on our relationships with each other is we give ourselves to Christ. Well, in the 1 minute we have left, we'll talk about being brothers and sisters. I was listening this week. I know that you guys, so I've explained this before, but I always feel like I have to give an excuse for this. I've seen Smallville many, many times. And the reason for that is because we actually, when I went through my long period of insomnia, when I couldn't sleep, I needed something to put in. And I put the DVDs of this in. Don't ask how I got the DVDs. It's not important. I would put it in, and so I became very familiar with the show. And the two stars of the show, they they have a podcast now. And I watch that podcast, I do. And Tom Welling, who played Superman, they had a guest on the show that was kind of a bit part. And they said, when I came on the show, Tom, you were so welcoming. You were so helpful to me. I didn't expect to be welcomed like that, and I didn't expect you to take the time to help me the way that you did. And I remember I could always go to you, I could talk to you. And Tom said, and this was so great, he said, well, I learned that from Michael Rosenbaum, who taught me that when I make other people on the show better, I'm making myself better as well. Meaning, if you take time out to help somebody else in the show, you shouldn't worry that they're going to eclipse you in glory. You should understand that they're going to boost you in glory. It's the same thing when the musicians are up here. If you can make another musician better, then the band becomes better and you become better. It's really interesting the way that the Bible frames this, because in James chapter 2, verse 8, it says, if you really fulfill the royal law according to the Scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you are doing well. You see, I always took that, you shall love your neighbor as you love yourself, I always took that as a comment on the degree of love you should have for your neighbor. Right? How much do you love yourself? 10. I don't know. How do you, 12.3? I don't know. Then that's how much love you need to apply to your neighbor. That's the way that I took that for a long time, is that it's talking about the amount of love you should have. But then I started to realize that it might not be about the amount of love as well. It might not be a commentary on the amount of love you're supposed to give, but maybe it should be a commentary on the type of relationship that you have to another. Meaning, it's not about how much love do I give myself? That's how much love I give to my neighbor. But you should love your neighbor as yourself, meaning you should be smart enough to understand that you and your neighbor are connected to each other. And you really can't love yourself without loving your neighbor. If you damage your neighbor, you're actually damaging yourself. And if you help your neighbor, you're actually helping yourself. And if you glorify your neighbor, you're actually glorifying yourself, because everything moves closer. All of creation, the whole music of the that's a different music. The spheres, circles. The music of the spheres draws closer to its endpoint. It draws closer to its culmination. It draws closer to that which it should be. All of us move forward. I was watching a show recently that talked about the prevalence of dropping the ball on the 1-yard line in football and how it's become really prevalent. And I didn't understand this until I watched this show. It was talking about how this happened one time that they could tell. The first time this happened was in 1971, the year I was born. And the next year that it happened was 1985. And this is where somebody's running down. They're completely free and clear. The end zone is right there. And in celebration, before they actually cross the goal line, they drop the ball to celebrate. To kind of, yes, I did it, Praise be to me. That's happened the first time in 1971. The next time it happened was 1985. Since about the 90s, it's happened multiple times a year. It's grown exponentially. Well, why has it grown exponentially? Because the desire to glorify ourselves and not thinking about the actual scoring and not thinking about what happens to the team if I don't score. There's been times when people have dropped the ball on the 1-yard line to celebrate their touchdown, and the other team has grabbed the ball on the 1-yard line and run it all the way back for a score, a 14-point swing, because somebody was more concerned with their own glory than the team's. We talk a lot about believing, belonging, and becoming. And what we want to talk about today and what we need to believe, how we need to belong to each other, and what we should become is this. Can you hear God calling? Can you hear God calling? Can you hear God calling you to put down your own life and take up a life of meaning? Can you hear Him calling you to become a disciple, to lay down all the parts of your life over time that you start to see aren't about following Jesus? Can you lay down everything for your brothers and your sisters and glorify them and love them? Can you love your neighbor as yourself? In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15 and 16, it says, rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into Him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. If you tear down the family, you tear down yourself. Because ultimately, each one of us must live in the house that we build. If you build up the family, you will build up the self. And you must understand, I am not talking about selfishness in disguise, but I am talking about the putting it to death of oneself to take up a life in Jesus Christ.
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow us on our Facebook page, where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out all of our past lessons and other videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian Church, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to His church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at www.fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Have a great week.